And we're live. I'm here with 𝕮𝖊𝖆𝖆. I got it right that time.
Hey, well done.
I'm not gonna lie. I practiced it all day yesterday. I'm like 𝕮𝖊𝖆𝖆, 𝕮𝖊𝖆𝖆, not Carcadia, 𝕮𝖊𝖆𝖆. I want to get it right this time.
There's only one C.
We're here to do the next part of our breakdown of English history from Stonehenge to now. We left off around, you said King James II?
Yeah, and just a little bit after that to the early 1700s.
Wonderful. Okay, well,
so
take the lead.
I will
want to take it. I'll ask questions along the way, and we'll see where it goes.
Sure. Well, I'm hoping we get from early 1700s right up to today over these probably next couple of hours, and I think that should be a lot easier because this is just the period where I start to care less, and it's also it gets out of the scope of what this series started as, which was the history of England. Because now it's the United Kingdom and everything gets more global. The empire kicks off. There's loads of stuff goes on in Scotland, which is now technically part of the same country, which it wasn't before. So it kind of the scope of history of the country really massively expands until you get to like the 1950s and it all collapses inwards again. But there's a lot to go on, and I think we have to start by looking at Scotland in this period, just because so much of like the political turmoil of the early 1700s in England is going on in Scotland, but it's directly affecting the English Parliament, the English monarchy. It's really the thing of the moment. So I haven't watched the whole last episode we did back, which was in November, which is absolutely insane that we're in July now. Goodness gracious. But we must have covered the Glorious Revolution, as it's called, when William of Orange, the Dutchman, was brought over to displace and overthrow King James II. He was the last Catholic monarch of this country, deposed in, I think, 1689. And after that, we get the start of Jacobitism. And I talk a lot about Jacobites, and it is related to another kind of tism, to care about the Jacobites these days. But the term Jacobite comes from Jacobus, which is the Latin word for James, or Latin version of James. So they are Jamesists, and they wanted to restore King James II back to the throne of Britain, because Scotland technically hadn't been legally enshrined as part of like the Union, as we call it. The United Kingdom didn't exist yet. But since King James I and the Stuart monarchy, a Scottish family had been on the English throne, which meant that the two countries basically were interlinked. And over this time, there was quite an industrial revolution in the Scottish lowlands, in Edinburgh and Glasgow, even all the way up to Fort William, which is close to the Highlands. But that meant there was a massive cultural divide in Scotland now between the lowlanders, who you can think of as almost like the carpetbaggers in the American Civil War. Like, you know, they basically are English. They don't speak Scots. They just speak English or don't speak any form of Gaelic. They're industrialized, they're trading, and they are nobles massively linked to the Parliament and English politics. They've ingratiated themselves into English society a lot over the Stuart period. And that kind of means the lowland Scots are massively anglicised. They basically are English at this point. But then you've got the Highlands, and the Highlanders are a completely different people to the lowlanders at this point. And I won't get into all the differences. You know them: the bagpipes, the kilts, the fancy daggers, the throwing the logs as a sport, and being extremely rambunctious and constantly fighting each other, separated into clans. This whole thing, yeah, they were the closest thing. They were the closest thing to like a Neolithic society in the modern age, and I really respect them for that. All like cattle grazers. They were hard people. They're if you ever see like an old Scottish Highlander, obviously they're wearing their kilt, which is thick wool, and wearing also a massive woolly blanket. And what these people would do is, as they were moving their herds of Highland cattle with the big old horns, very aesthetic, across the Highlands, that they would have nowhere to sleep as they traveled days moving these herds. And all they would do, and this is Scotland, bear in mind, like not far off Alaska, which you now have experience with, and like no matter what time of year, what weather, when they needed to go to sleep, they just unrolled this blanket, wrapped themselves up in it, and off they go. They sleep at night, just like in the constant rain and snow, and with like no vegetation around to forage because their cattle had eaten it all. Hard ass people.
I'm looking at photos now of Scotland, the Scottish Highlands. I did not realize how beautiful Scotland was.
Well, I think it's so interesting because, like, looking at those photos, right? The mountains are absolutely incredible, but you'll notice how just like barren it is. There's only like
no
rock
trees.
and grass. Exactly. There's no trees. But that is
looks like
all because
it looks like a game landscape from like an 08 video game when they couldn't animate all the trees in there. It looks like like that. Wow.
Well, the whole reason for that is that the Highlanders lived off of their cattle. Which are you familiar with the famous Scottish Highland cow?
I'm not.
Oh, look that up! The super long-haired ginger cows with massive horns.
What? Okay, yeah, I recognize them now. The emo cows has the
literally. But like you can see from the landscape of the Highlands and even the animals themselves and what the people wore, like this is just a totally different place to anywhere in England, and now of course anywhere in Edinburgh, because Edinburgh basically is an English city at that point. And there's a lot of tensions going on because Scotland has just at this point in history has been a political powder keg for 100 years, and they were so involved in complicating the English civil wars by changing sides all the time, just depending on the changing of priorities of people who are in power. Scotland's a political mess now and always has been. Or at least has been for hundreds of years.
About Scotland, they've always seemed to be peripherally on the edge and always causing mayhem for everybody else. Whether it was on the Hadrian with Hadrian's Wall, having to block them off, whether it was how they had allies with the French, wherever. I mean, I don't know how long it lasted, but for a long time they were allies with the French. If England attacked either one, the other one would jump to the other side to flank them. Which is, pretty smart, pretty clever.
Some people say that alliance between France and Scotland still exists and is the oldest in history, but that's not true. Only because Scotland becomes part of the United Kingdom, and Scotland ceases to exist as a sovereign state essentially in 1705, just about where we are.
Does that make the longest alliance? If it's not Scotland and France, does that make the longest alliance Portugal and England then?
Yes, or at least Portugal and Britain. I think, because if it was just Portugal and England, it would have the same problem where England isn't its own sovereign state anymore as part of the United Kingdom. But I think it was technically Britain because for the longest time, Wales was just considered an appendage to England. But that does technically mean if you're talking about Britain before Scotland joins the Union, you're talking about England and Wales. So I think it's just a technicality, basically. But it is technically true that, Britain and Portugal have had an alliance for like 700 years or something unbroken, which is pretty damn cool. But you're right. Yes, that alliance with Scotland and France is basically to just pincer England and just cause chaos, as they constantly, all of Scottish political history is just causing absolute chaos in England, basically, but also amongst each other. Because like I said, the clans were, even before the Lowlanders became a distinct Anglicized culture, the clans were always fighting each other and just causing utter chaos. But this is all important because in 1689, just after William III of Orange and his wife Mary II take the throne to say, we're getting rid of Catholicism, we're bringing back good old Protestantism like the good old days, looking back at Elizabeth at this point, the Scottish Highlanders are pissed off at this, not necessarily because they're Catholic. That's a big misconception about the Jacobite uprising, is that all the Scottish Highlanders were Catholic, which no, isn't true. John Knox, who is basically a Calvinist, completely converted all of Scotland to Protestantism. Essentially, there were
Presbyterianism specifically.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly. Which is why I say he's like basically a Calvinist.
Yeah,
They're Presbyterian in a looser sense. But even then, just going on with the chaos, just before the English Civil War, there was the Scottish Bishops' War in Scotland, which was, again, it was all about ecclesiology. It was more higher church people versus Presbyterians. But essentially, 90% of Scotland was Presbyterian at this point, and the remaining 10% was split amongst Catholics and other kinds of Protestants. I think there were only 2 Catholic Highland clans at the time of these uprisings. So the majority of Highlanders who rebelled against the king, refused to accept William of Orange, were doing it because a Stuart had just been dethroned. The Scottish family had just been kicked off the throne for a Dutchman. That was the main grievance at the start. So they kick off and basically start a rebellion in the Highlands against the Scottish Lowlands, because we're talking.
I just looked up William on. We said William of Orange. We said
yes.
So that was William. I just looked it up. I did not realize that was the. Oh wow, what's that book called? There's some political book about England. And popular on circles, Patriarch. I can't remember what it's called exactly, but he's on the cover of it. I never recognized. I just recognized the guy.
Is that Patriarchia? I think.
Yes, that's the book I'm thinking of.
Is that him on the front? Okay,
yeah,
so it is.
From my copy on it, he's on the front of it.
Right, I thought that was earlier, but I've just looked it up and it says, published 1680, which would have been just about the time. It was written just before the English Civil War in 1642, but only published in 1680, which was actually before William III came to power. But yes, Patriarchia is like one of the first, you could call it like ideological pamphlets. Yeah. And it's an ideological justification of the setup of the state as it was in 17th century England, which William III and his wife Mary II Stuart took advantage of. So what is quite interesting about the Jacobite rebellions at this time is, like I say, Scotland is a separate sovereign state to England technically, but not actually in practice at all. And the Scottish Lowlanders, who form army regiments to fight the Scottish Highlanders who started to rebel, just use English weaponry and clothing. If you look up at any of the photos of the early uprisings, all of the Scottish army are wearing red, like the old redcoats of the English, even though they're supposedly not part of the same country. But I think that gives you an impression of understanding how Scotland, in a political sense, was already British as something of a conglomerate with England.
Yeah. And
this uprising happens and it gets put down pretty excessively. There's something called the Glencoe Massacre, which is a glen. I think that's the Scots Gaelic word for valley, where the Scottish army set up 400 battalions of 400 soldiers at either end of a valley, one of which to stay put on the exit and the other one to make its way through the entrance and up the valley, just killing everyone they find and burning down everything they can. And this was of Clan MacDonald, who I think were one of the only 2 remaining Catholic clans. And I think only 30 of them were counted as massacred, which seems a bit insane, but you've got to consider how sparsely populated the Highlands are. Again, think of Alaska. Think of how much is there compared to how many people there are.
Yeah.
Similar situation, but I find it incredible that for the next 50 years, this tiny part of the country with a minuscule population is just the biggest pain in the arse possible and completely dictates like what politics is all about for 50 years. So I really admire them for that, as well as their cause. Because I'm biased, I'm a Jacobite. I think they were right to want James II and his descendants back on the throne.
I think Michael knows, the Daily Wire Catholic commentator, is also a Jacobite. Whenever the English British politics comes up, he always goes about, it's not the right for king. It's not the right for king. The Jacobites. Oh, we got a question here from Perkio. Were the Scots Irish Highland or Lowland?
But the Scots Irish, they were, I believe, mostly Lowland, but the settlement of the Scots Irish, I think, was just before this period. I think this is when you get the plantations in Ulster that they called. I think that was a few decades before, but at that point, Lowland Scotland was already becoming anglicised. But that's also why they were moved over to Ireland, because they were Protestant, and they simply just wanted to displace the Irish Catholics. And we must have talked about this in the last episode about the plantations and the land confiscations, where the British state just said, any Catholic who owns land, guess what? You don't anymore. And we're giving it to these Scottish people, mostly Scottish, a few English settlers who came over, took the land, farmed on it, got all the wealth, and just absolutely destituted the Irish Catholics. It's always a funny one being English and proud to be English, and Catholic and proud to be Catholic, looking at what happened in Ireland at this time and just going, and I say that because you can still find a lot of English nationalists today who are very anti-Irish and very anti-Catholic, and they'll lump me in as some sort of like a fifth column by being Catholic, but I want to be nuanced. But it's tough. You can't really be nuanced where they're just like, we're basically just going to genocide these people and remove every single thing they've ever owned. Anyway, there's your little tangent. I'm pretty sure they were all Lowland. They could have been Highland in there, though, because like I said, they were basically entirely Protestant at this point.
Okay.
But the Lowlands were politically English, essentially. So that is... there's a little bit more to cover with Scotland before the Jacobite Rebellion kind of becomes a bigger thing. The next important thing is these days, Scottish people, for the most part, are the most insufferable kind of shitlib. I don't know why Scotland is basically our California. I don't know how this ever happened.
I didn't realize that was the case, and that was tragic.
Years ago, I made a shit post to put on YouTube, making fun of how like Scots are the liberal ones. I don't want to tar them all with the same brush because I know so many who aren't like this, but the majority of them are like this. But they will jump up and down and scream and say, "We need to be independent from England. How dare a foreign parliament dictate to us what we can do? So we need to leave the United Kingdom and join the European Union." And just have like fucking idiots.
Fucking stupid.
Yeah, it is. But they also the modern narrative of the Scottish shitlib today is they view themselves as essentially Irish. They confuse their history within Britain with the Irish history within Britain, and they say that England is an imperial power who's always oppressed Scotland. Like, right? Should we talk about the Darien scheme then, where before Scotland joined the United Kingdom and they saw England receiving so much wealth from its colonies in North America, they said, we need to do the same. We need to also be an imperialist power. So yeah, this notion they were ever anti-imperialist is just nonsense. The Darien, so have you ever heard of the Darien Gap? It's quite famous these days.
I have not.
It's south of Panama, and I think it's in like Venezuela or Colombia or something. It's considered the most dangerous place on Earth because it's mostly entirely jungle, filled with like jaguars and venomous snakes and all that lot. But also the world's most dangerous drug cartels because it's a part of Central America that connects to Latin America. But there's no roads that go through it, so it's entirely used by drug cartels to smuggle drugs from South America up to Central and North America. And that's where 300 years ago, the Scottish decided that's going to be our colony. And it was an absolute disaster. I was reading a stat earlier that 20% of all the wealth in Scotland had been poured into this colony. And the colony becomes an absolute failure. And there's loads, the reasons why aren't so important, but basically they pissed off the Spanish. And like England could afford to piss off the Spanish with the Royal Navy. Scotland couldn't, and they end up pissing off the Spanish. The Spanish blockade this colony before they even set up a single trade route back to Scotland. And I don't even know what they would have been trading really, because like there was the fur trade in North America and timber, but there's not really that much else down in like the neck of Panama. Yeah. I think there's a reason why they just dug out a massive canal there, because like they weren't getting rid of any valuable resources by doing that. Perkio said, is Nova Scotia a Scottish colony? I don't think so. I think it's probably just, well, no, most of Canada was all entirely English Crown territory. It's probably just that the climate in Nova Scotia is basically the same as Scotland. But there's a New Caledonia in, I think it's Polynesia. And I also think it's a French colony. And I remember as well, Caledonia was the Latin word for Scotland. The Romans used, but they wanted to call this Darien colony New Caledonia. But the collapse of this colony threatened to completely destroy Scotland back home, because like I say, 20% of all Scotland's money was in this colony. And at the time, the British Parliament was trying really hard to incorporate Scotland into the Union as an official part of the country. And the Scots were saying, no, we like things the way they are. We like being a satellite state, but we still have the autonomy to go and do these colony building experiments. And then their one and only colony building experiment utterly fails, and the country goes, oh no, we're going to completely collapse. So that then means the Scots have to join the Union simply in order to not be bankrupt. They end up needing the English state's money just to avoid complete and utter chaos. So the Scots essentially end up asking to join England in a union. And that's another important point to point out to these shitlibs who said, oh, we were always oppressed. Like, no, you asked to join and we saved you from yourself. So they were never anti-imperialist. They were never unwilling participants. They just suffered the consequences of their own actions.
I do find it funny that there's two things I find funny about your little sphere of politics over there. Was everyone the victim mentality of the woke stuff and the liberalism and all that shit stuff? The Irish should be kings by this point. Instead, they're just being completely fucked over because they're still white. I find that tragic but kind of funny.
I heard today that out of like 5.5 million people in Ireland, 1.5 million of those are foreigners.
Jeez,
which, like, look, it's fucking crazy to look back at the genuine like oppression and genocide that the British state has done to the Irish, and then they get a liberation and immediately do it to themselves. And I know it's a tired point. I have a lot of Irish mutuals now who hate when people say that, but sorry guys, it's worth saying because it's true. Yeah. Like when the British state
saved them, okay? Conor McGregor is going to save Ireland.
He's our guy. He is Ireland's Cromwell. Who knows how that would turn out?
Who knows? But regardless, I'm here for it. It's gonna be funny.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, where should I carry on from then? Let me think, because I think that's a good point then. So we had the Act of Union passed, and I think it was 1707, and that is Scotland joins the United Kingdom. The flag changes to what is now recognised as the Union Jack minus the Northern Irish red stripes. And politics starts to change a lot at this point, and this is why I think I become less interested in politics at this time, because like my interest really peaks at the English Civil War and then just declines from there, because Parliament becomes more powerful over the next, these last 400 years. The people driving it, our Parliament, which just means bureaucracy, faceless politics, party squabbles, and just a load of like feeling like nothing is happening while things are happening. It really muddies the water of trying to understand, like, okay, who are the power players right now? What do they want? How long do they live for? What do they achieve? It just becomes Parliament on one long march of consolidating its power like a bureaucratic hydra, and then becoming the managerial state as we know it now. Over the last 300 years, that's where this really develops. But along with the Act of Union, around the same time, I can't remember what act this is called. I think it's the Act of Succession. Parliament passes a law which says the monarch cannot be Catholic. If they become Catholic, they automatically abdicate the throne. What that then means is, I can't remember how the line of succession then goes from William of Orange, but essentially I think it means that there ends up not being an heir which isn't Catholic as being viable. I think maybe Mary was infertile, or maybe William was infertile, so they had no children, which would mean that the closest was then actually James II's son, who, if you are a Jacobite, you call James III. Now, I could be wrong. but I think that's how the succession works there.
Oh, now, why,
But what it
why
essentially-
is he named the third if you're a Jacobite? What's he named if you're not a Jacobite?
If you're not a Jacobite, then there has been no James III.
Okay.
Because he wasn't coronated. He's not viewed as a legitimate king in the eyes of the British state, but he is to all Jacobites. And as well, his son, who we'll get into, the Bonnie Prince Charlie, well, he's called Charlie because his name's Charles. So if you are a Jacobite, the current King Charles III is King Charles IV for that same reason. So I remember when Charles chose not to change his name and he took his regal name of being King Charles III, I remember thinking, oh, that's really cool. I like that because I like Charles III and Charles II. I went, oh, wait, that means that it's another nail in the coffin against Jacobitism for them to say that the Bonnie Prince was never really king. And you go, oh, damn it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm following. So what happens?
So what this ends up, this means there's no, with the act of succession meaning no Catholic can take the throne, that means there's another succession crisis in the same way that there was, which brought William of Orange to the throne. And what they decide to do at this point is, I don't know the family relations of how they make it work, but the next closest relative that's a Protestant is who becomes King George I of Hanover, the House of Hanover in Germany. So we've already had the Highland Scots kick it off saying, how dare you overthrow a king from a Scottish family and replace him with a Dutchman? And then they just do it with a German. So this is in 1714 that George I becomes king, and he's incredibly unpopular with everyone, mostly for the fact that he's as German gets. They weren't wearing lederhosens by this point, but if they were, he would be rocking one in Buckingham Palace, looking completely out of place. He barely spoke a word of English, and for his entire reign, he had to get ministers to basically just translate everything for him. And I don't know why else he was deeply unpopular, because I understand those are reasons for why you should be unpopular. But I think he was a bit wet. He was a bit incompetent. And this is why Parliament ended up being able to grow more power, because he was providing very little resistance. He didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't prepared to take this throne. You got to think that the son of a king is raised from day one to be a king. They're like, this is going to be your job. This is everything you're going to be. Well, your whole life is going to be around. And if you're not expecting it, you could just be completely taken for a ride by the Machiavellian foxes in power as they were in Parliament. So he's just a bit useless. He becomes king in 1714, and in 1715, there's another Jacobite uprising. And at this point, they start being known as like the last numbers of the year. So the 1715 uprising is called the 15. And I don't know much about this one. The 15 is quite a bit of like a fizzled out one. I think that this is when Spain and France see the potential of funding a Jacobite rebellion to fight and overthrow the Hanoverian dynasty. And they want to do that for multiple reasons. One, you got to think, if they did restore, I think at this time, the Stuarts were in exile in Paris, they would end up going to Rome. But, they're living in Paris out of the pocket of the king. If the French king says, right, well, I put you back on the throne, didn't I? You remember who, this is political blackmail as it's always worked, is I'm putting you in a position of power so you can do me a favor. Still happens today all the time. That's all politics is. I'd say it's less the friend-enemy distinction. It's more about who is in your pocket. Who can you blackmail? So, yeah, France and Spain see it.
One nation maintains a lot of its strengths. The 3 Bs, as AA calls it. The blowjobs, blackmail, and bribery.
Yeah, and I'm sure that in early 1700 Paris, the Ancien regime, there was a lot of all 3 of those Bs going on. But that means that they see political instability in the newly formed country of the United Kingdom, originating in the Scottish Highlands, and French and Spanish states massively agitate it. They fund it, they equip it, and there is another uprising, and it fails. And I don't know much about the 15 because the big one that everyone knows about is the 45. That takes place under King George II, the first son, and he is massively more popular. I don't know if he was raised in England his whole life, but he speaks the language at least, and he becomes a distinguished military leader through, I think you'll love this, the War of Jenkins's Ear. This was we didn't cover the age of piracy, but I have to just talk about that a little bit because while the new colonies in North America are being set up under Elizabeth I, they basically do what Russia is doing today with Wagner Group, and they realize that to have what is legally a private company do your military work, when they say, whoa, we haven't declared war, we're not fighting you, it's this private company. That's what the countries of Europe did with their navies. They signed warrants of privateering for a private owner of a battleship to go around the Caribbean fighting the navy of the other countries. Now, piracy begins when there's lots of these people owning private warships making loads of money, at least from the English side, by destroying Spanish galleons. There's the famous one of, I think they call it Cortez's treasure. It's not from Cortez, but there's a ridiculous shipment of gold leaving Central America to go back to Spain, and it gets shipwrecked in a storm. Mm-hmm. And these English privateers descend on it like locusts, get filthy rich.
You can in Florida, you can actually still find someone that go on the beach sometimes.
Really?
Go there overboard, or every once in a while just be washed up onto the coast of Florida. You see people out there with metal detectors trying to find old Spanish gold. They were just washed up on shore on the coast of Florida.
I definitely watched a documentary about this not that long ago. Like, what was that? What was that ship called? The San Jose.
Florida has a lot of really cool like treasure hunting lore because of the Spanish and all the piracy stuff. We have some great treasure hunting lore here.
I bet. And like, yes, I know it's still ongoing. So I had to explain what privateers are. And so like English piracy in the Caribbean happened when France and Spain were saying, right, we've had enough of this nonsense. That we know that you are giving them license to wage war against us, which means we're going to start treating them as combatants of the state. And if we get attacked anymore by your privateers, we are going to declare war on you and invade your country. We're not letting you get away with this legal nonsense.
And was Sir Francis Drake one of those pirates? Or am I thinking of someone else?
He was one of these privateers, but when they become pirates is when, like I've said, they've all got filthy rich off of all this Spanish gold, and they're still all in the Caribbean. And then Elizabeth says, right, that's it, no more privateering. You're all unemployed. So these privateers go, right, I've got no source of income. I've got no ties to the English state now. I'm filthy rich and want to be richer. And I've got a boat with lots of guns. What am I going to do with no job? And then that's literally how piracy starts. They're all in the Caribbean. They get a note saying, yeah, you're unemployed now, and they have to fend for themselves. And that's when, they realize we no longer have loyalty to the British state, and they start attacking the Royal Navy as well as all the other navies. And then piracy blows up.
I mean, obviously pirates are a lot of sinful nature in pirates, a lot of sinful acts involving pirates. I'm not gonna lie though, the rationale, like, well, I'm unemployed, I want more money, and I have a giant gunship. I know what I'm gonna do. Makes complete sense, and it's kind of rad actually. It's kind of rad. It's
rad or not, the point is just so obviously inevitable that you say these like, they already are scumbags, these privateers. And they've got warships, and you say, right, you are released from your duty and your loyalty to us, and we're not going to provide you with income. Go fuck yourself. What do you think is going to happen?
Really dumb move, honestly.
Yeah, it is. But I do wonder, like, what else could they have done? Obviously, like, probably recalled them back to Britain before giving them their P45, which is your termination of employment letter today. But anyway. So like I say, Spain and France ended up crying about this because the English privateers were the most dominant, but they were doing it themselves. Like, obviously, of course they were. And the War of Jenkins's Ear, to get back to this point in time, it's Jenkins. I can't remember his first name. He's a shipmaster of. I don't think it's a warship. I think it's like a trading ship. He's en route back from America to Britain with cargo, and he gets attacked and boarded by Spanish privateers. And I'm pretty sure at this point, like, there hadn't been any privateer action in a while. Everyone had stopped doing it, but then it was viewed as a massive act of aggression by Spain doing it again. And what they did, Jenkins was the captain of this ship. They cut his ear off, gave it back to him, and said, "Give this to your king and tell him that he's next," basically. And that kicked off the War of Jenkins's Ear, which is where George II got his military prowess. The war ended in literally nothing, like no territory changed. I think a few ships got sank on either side, and then they said, "You know what? Okay, we'll pack this in now." So the war was pretty inconsequential, but just the fact that the new king commanded a ship during this war meant that he was very popular. But the second Jacobite, no, the third Jacobite.
That's weird to think about, like a king. I can picture kings leading battles. I can't really picture kings leading naval battles. I don't know why.
Yeah, it must have happened at other points.
Yeah, this seems very whale. This is interesting. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And if you're losing a battle, you can retreat and get the king out of there. If the ship's going down, you're kind of fucked.
Yeah.
You know, I guess it makes sense, but it's still a weird thing to think about. A king leading the
It is, but it's also interesting as well that it's a bit of a tangent, but I think we have to do tangents at this point just because my knowledge is thinner than it is in previous periods. But one interesting thing is like the relation of the military to social classes in this country at this time and up to like the Napoleonic era is crazy because there's Wellington's famous quote that the army are, what does he say about them? I think he says like the lowest scum of all of Britain. There was a real interesting dynamic where the officers, who were, you know, the posh landed gentry as they mostly are now, viewed military service as a massive sign of distinction, as they did for George II, having fought in that war. But the lower classes were the only people who were in the lower ranks of the army were basically ones who would starve on the streets otherwise, or they were given a deal to avoid prison time by serving in the military. And have you ever heard of being pressed into service?
No.
Have you ever heard of taking the king's shilling?
No, I've not. I've heard it, but I don't know exactly what it means.
So they probably mentioned it in Pirates of the Caribbean at some point. So being pressed into service was there were things called press gangs, who were men who would go around coastal towns in Britain, find any fighting age male they could who knew how to sail, kidnap him, and say, "Right, you're in the Navy now." Like that was conscription. It was literally as they're bringing in their fishing boat and taking the fish off the boat, the press gangs just grab them, literally take them away, and then they're shipped off to, you know, the Caribbean or the Indian Ocean. That's it. Your life's over.
Wow.
And there was
I mean, every army's had like forced every military in history has had forced conscription and slavery kind of thing. You know, Rome had it. The Ottomans had it with the Janissaries.
Yes.
I did not realize England did it that way. They just grab you off. You're coming in from fishing boats, and they just grab you and say, "You're serving now." Yeah,
literally. Wow. If you're an able-bodied young man who has set foot on a boat before, if a press gang finds you, you're done. You're literally just done.
The more I learn about British history in the 1700s, the more I understand the U.S. Constitution's Third Amendment about not letting soldiers are not allowed to demand access to your home to live there while they're traveling. The more I learn about your guys' history of this time period, the more that amendment makes sense. And
it really, because I thought to mention it, but it slipped my mind when I was talking about like the Glencoe massacre and when the Scottish Lowland Army was first putting down the Highland rebels. I was just reading that the officers were basically given a pass of free quarter, which, you know, the Third Amendment says quarter for a reason. They're just given a piece of paper from the state, which means they can just knock on someone's door and say, "Hi, so yeah, your house and all your food belong to us now until we leave." There's like the 1700s in Britain were absolutely mental. And there's you can take the Yarvin route of like doing a value-free analysis of the reasons for the revolution and say, well, actually, he'll say things like there was a lot of Puritan hysteria when they were saying, oh, these taxes are unbearable, and it was like minuscule taxation.
Mhm.
And when they were saying that they're sending swarms of bureaucrats from London over here to strangle us, and there was like 15 bureaucrats a year, or maybe not even that much. So there's a lot of it that is Puritan hysteria, but then you hear about politics in Britain.
I am the first to admit the American Revolutionary War, all the causes given are kind of just what's the word I'm looking? The icing on the cake. The kind of like, it's used to justify it, but really, we didn't want to be under someone else's thumb. That's it.
Absolutely. And
I mean,
like any independence, but any independence movement is like that. Like, saying that piracy was inevitable after the state of privateering in Caribbean. Well, you could say that about all of imperialism. You could say, like, ship off a load of your people thousands of miles away, and then 100 years later expect them to have the exact same loyalty. No, that's not going to happen. They're going to develop their own wealth in these colonies, and when they've got their own wealth, they're going to say, who the hell are you?
Their own wealth, their own culture, their own way of doing things.
Yeah.
Whenever I've been pressed, like, what really was the cause of the Revolutionary War, I kind of have the point, like, to me at least, the catalyzing moment was the Boston Massacre.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
Seems to me to be the main catalyst for everything after that became justification for getting even after the Boston Massacre.
Well, you're not wrong, because again, like I say, with the Glencoe Massacre, only about 30 people died. And, obviously that's an absolute tragedy, and they were all murdered. Each one of them is an injustice. But when you hear the word massacre, you normally think of bigger numbers. That's all I'm saying. But
the Boston Massacre was 4 people.
Really?
Yeah. So like 4 people. 4 people killed, 2 injured, I think.
Yeah. But
it was nothing.
Yeah. You're right, though, that it is like the catalyst, like that moment of aggression, because the Glencoe Massacre, like, trying to say, despite not being that many people, but like, fucking hell, if 30 people were killed by the British Army in Scotland today, it'd be insane. But with that in mind, for the next 50 years, that Glencoe Massacre becomes like it remains the driving force of these Jacobite rebellions, as well as other things. Like I say, there are some Catholics, there are plenty of high Tories who believe that it's unjust to remove the Stuarts, even if they did say, we're all Anglicans, but you can't just remove a king from the throne. That's not how it works. But really, I think the Scottish Highlanders were the one who kept up the rebellion the most in the first half of the 18th century. And I do think, like, just like with the Boston Massacre, it was kind of like, once the Glencoe Massacre happened, it was like, right, well, this is going to be a problem until either they win or they're completely crushed. There is something about an event like that of, like, a government that is like half foreign, half not, ends up like just exploding this powder keg with a massive aggression against these disenchanted people. And then you go, right, well, the cat's out of the bag now. You can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. Exact same thing here. And it's quite remarkable just knowing that, like, at this point, the American Revolution's only 30 years away, and like such a similar thing is going to happen again. So I was trying to think so I got sidetracked after talking about press gangs. So yeah, that's pretty well established. But there was also taking the king's shilling. Now, I don't know how much of this is a modern, what do they call it, like legend, but supposedly in any tavern around the country, the landlord, which we call them landlord, it just means the pub owner, is, I think they're either paid by the government or they're told, do this or you're going to be arrested. Is for every like X amount of pints that they serve, they have to drop a shilling into the pint. And this is before filtered beer. So like everything, even if you have like a golden colored ale, it's not translucent at all. It's entirely opaque. You can't, if there was anything in your drink, you wouldn't be able to see it. So, this is why people started drinking out of glass, because at the time these were all tankards were made out of pewter. So you can't, if you looked into a pewter tankard, you can't see from the sides and you can't see from the top if there's anything in there, but there'd be a shilling in your drink. And if you drank the drink and a shilling came out, you're going in the Navy. They're like exactly the same as the press gangs coming around. And I don't know how exactly they'd enforce it. I don't know if the landlord would take your name or something. But if you were seen to take the king's shilling with the king's face on it, that's it. You've been conscripted into the navy. So just going to the pub ran the risk of basically dying of scurvy.
We can't. How about this? It's very clear. It's easy to imagine if So let me see if I got this right. The landlord would put a shilling in someone's cup, and if they drank the cup and they took the shilling, they were basically enlisted. Is that
well? If they had the shilling in their drink, they'd already been conscripted. But it was I don't think it was a choice. I don't think you could take the shilling and therefore sign up. I think it's if you were given the shilling, sorry, your number's up and you're joining. I could be wrong.
So clearly, the landlord would get rid of people he didn't like using that power.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Seems like an obvious way how would happen.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like if you read a social history of this period, I'm sure people would have done research and found examples of that. But that is also another reason why you could imagine that all of the lower classes in the military were the scum of the earth. Because if a landlord of a local community knows that this kid is an absolute little shit who's been stealing from everyone and beating people up, you go, and he comes in and orders a pint of ale, you just go, oh, I've got an idea. And but you just send that awful, terrible, scourge of the community off into the navy, and off they go. And I was just, yeah, exactly. Or even say they rise up the ranks and become a great military hero. You say, good for you, but I want you out of my town now because you're an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
So that was all just, pondering the intricacies of class differences, because if you were an officer in the military, that was a massive sign of distinction. Every noble family, they would, I can't remember how this order goes, but they would say that you want at least 5 sons, and they say, right, so you want one who's a vicar, one who's an officer, one who's a doctor, one who's a banker, and I can't remember what the other one was. But if you're a nobleman and you want to improve your family's standing, it would be get as many sons as you can, and one of those great positions to get them into the upper echelons of the society. Maybe he gets knighted for his efforts and he gets medals and he meets the king, and that's exactly what you want as a noble patriarch. Military is a great way to do it. Anyway, that was all just saying why George II was more popular. But George has an interesting relationship with Parliament as well, because at this point, so you got to think the leader of the British Parliament is the Prime Minister. And it's a good one to think about etymologically, because what that means is they're the leader of all the other ministers, the members of Parliament. There wasn't really one until the reign of George II, when is it William Walpole? Something Walpole. I can't remember what his first name is. It's Robert or William. I think it's Robert. Anyway, he essentially ends up becoming the first prime minister through good politicking by making himself an invaluable ally of the king. There's a real lesson in there for power politics. How do you make yourself? How do you improve your own position in a political structure? It's by making your position and your skills useful to whoever's in charge. And that's what Walpole did with the king. And he essentially created the office of prime minister by being so indispensable to the king politically, by keeping a hold of things and advising and negotiating, that he essentially invented the office of prime minister. Later in George's life, though, because he was a military commander, he was a man who wasn't going to be pushed around. I think this is a tale as old as time, really, isn't it? You have a political advisor who is indispensable to somewhat of an autocrat, and the autocrat elevates their position, and then they realize, shit, I've elevated them up to my level, and now they're challenging me. That is what George ended up finding with Parliament.
That happens a lot. I don't know why this reminded me of that, but it's a very common theme in history. You have an advisor who keeps giving him more and more power, then it becomes a threat. The only and either the king kills the advisor or the advisor usurps the throne.
Yes,
it's normally how it goes. The only time I know where it didn't work out like that was Queen Isabella of Castile. Her father was completely controlled by his advisor, to such an extent that the advisor would bang on the king's door when he was sleeping with his queen and would say, "I told you, you're not allowed to sleep with her tonight. You can't have any more kids," because he didn't want her. He didn't want him to marry that person in the first place. And so he would interrupt their lovemaking and yell at both of them.
What? That is
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, apparently he was way older than the king, and the theory is he might have molested the king when he was young,
What?
and that's how he kept the king under his control for so long.
Whoa,
Yeah, and he also did the same to the next king.
man,
Prince, yeah.
it's so funny looking at like the depravity of the different countries at this time, where it's like in England you've got the press gangs, in Spain you've got raped kings.
Yeah,
it just fits the character of the people so much more.
I don't know if you're interested in Spanish history, but I recommend this book to everyone when history comes up. Kirsten Downey wrote a book called Isabella, the Royal Queen. It's a giant biography of Queen Isabella of Castile. I recommend it. It is maybe the best biography I've ever read. It's so good. Anyway, yeah, because Queen Isabella is my favorite monarch. And what she has, the influence, the effect, not effects, the connection she has to the British monarchy or the English monarchy because of all her daughters she kept sending over there is a very interesting thing to study.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a Queen of Castile, but of England, but I can't remember who it would have been.
I think it was Queen Isabella's third daughter, I think.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I definitely, I've heard of that biography, and I would love to know more about Spanish history. The only bit I know a decent amount at the moment is the Civil War. I just seem to love civil wars for some reason. They are fascinating.
They are fascinating. I mean, I'm a Southerner, so I love the Civil War here, of course.
Of course.
All civil wars are pretty interesting. The only civil war I find boring, actually, is Caesar versus Pompey. That's the only civil war I find boring. And
I think
debated if it's even a civil war or not.
Who was the one who fought against Sulla in, like, I think it was called the Social Wars before Caesar? I think that's even more boring.
I can't remember. Sulla I find fascinating, but I find him once he's won fascinating. And I kind of wish we had a Sulla. I wish Trump was a Sulla and would just start purging, because that's what we desperately need. But sadly, he's going the Caesar route and is making friends with everybody. And he'll get stabbed in the back. It's just what's going to happen. Fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got to see who's going to be the Brutus. What if it was J.D. Vance?
J.D. Vance, please.
Yeah.
We need him and Barron.
So, okay. Let me think of where we even got at any point. I think there's just more Jacobites at this point, you know, in the early 1700s. Have you ever heard of the show Outlander?
Vaguely. Let me look it up real quick. Okay, I have heard this. I have not seen it.
It's all right. I would suggest it's good to watch the first few episodes because you get certainly at least like the aesthetic and a bit of an idea of what was like going on in the Highlands at this point. And it is, you know, that aesthetic and everything is important because it needs to be stressed how different the Highland Scottish were to the Lowlands. But what Outlander does for the 45 Rebellion is kind of like what Braveheart does for like the mythology of Scotland, where it's viewed as, they're all English. They're the English oppressing them. But no, what has to be constantly stressed is that the people putting down the Jacobite rebellions were 90% Scottish Lowlanders, supported by like the English monarchy and English finance and those sorts of things. And the Scottish Highlanders weren't all Catholic, which again, Outlander would make you think that the reason why the Jacobite rebellion was happening was because they were Catholic. No, it's a multitude. It's partly just a whole ethnic thing that they want to see the Scottish family restored to the British throne. And there's the sort of blood libel that carries on from the massacre of Glencoe. So Outlander's not very historically accurate in terms of the politics, but it's worth watching a few episodes, I think. So that sort of it's a very exciting period where this is, I think, the last time that England could have remained a Catholic country and like for it to be possible at all, because the leader of the 45 Jacobite uprising is Charles Edward Stuart. I think he's got more middle names than that, like so many nobles do. He's called by the Scottish Bonnie Prince Charlie because he's said to be a handsome old chap, a young chap, I should say. He is the son of James III, who is in exile in Rome. James is already an old man at this point, and James had the opportunity to invade Britain with the French in, I want to say, the 1720s. But I think there was a storm. Like then they had a fleet posted at Normandy, ready to take the French army over to Britain to restore the Stuarts, with the goal being, the French wanted to make Britain a Catholic country again, to bring them on side. And it nearly happened, but a storm wiped out half the fleet in the English Channel.
What the fuck is with storms wiping out fleets in the English Channel, man? Okay, it affected Julius Caesar. It got the Spanish Armada. It's got Napoleon. It got the French. What is going on? Is it really that dangerous? Is it really that stormy?
It is in the age of sail. So that just off the coast of Cornwall, there is a group of islands called the Isles of Scilly. It's a funny name, but there are the amount of stories from the age of sail of just a boat crashed, a ship crashed just off the coast of the Isles of Scilly. 500 people died. Next year it happened again. Like it's just it's
your guys' version of the river in China that's always flooding,
or more like the Bermuda Triangle, I think. It's just like if you just, when you enter the English Channel in the sailboat, you are literally just crossing your fingers the entire time.
I will say that is one thing I love about European history, is that so many of the Mediterranean powers were naval powers. They could sail, but also it's like the most peaceful sea on the globe. But the moment you go past the Straits of Gibraltar or the Pillars of Hercules, you're just in no chaos right there.
Yeah, the Atlantic is like the most evil ocean on the planet, and it's the English Channel is where the Atlantic meets the North Sea through a choke point, and like it's just horrible. You got to think the Mediterranean, it's connected to the Atlantic Ocean, but it's almost just like the world's largest lake almost. Yes. That connects to an ocean. It's not really it's not an ocean. It's hardly a sea in its own right. And it is funny when you when we all go and see freaking Christopher Nolan's Odyssey movie. We can look forward to this, but I was going to say, reading the Odyssey, it's funny hearing about the storms that throw the ships off, and you think that's got to be like a ripple compared to just what happens every other day in the English Channel. And you think the North Sea meet horrible place.
That does make the Carthaginians way more impressive, in my opinion, because they were, back then, ancient triming sails and stuff, and still they were going across the English Channel. They went all the way around Africa. It makes their sailing.
The Carthaginians went off the English Channel, did they?
Yeah, they are.
I didn't realize that.
They were trading with everybody, man. They circled all the way around Africa and back.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
They apparently were the first European people to discover gorillas. They had trading networks everywhere. They were the best seamen of the ancient world. Actually, it's so much that Napoleon would constantly, when we're talking about his war was Britain, would say, "We are Rome. We are the land power. Britain is Carthage. They are the naval power." And they are also evil like Carthage because they sacrificed children or something. Like he was just constantly hating on the British.
I know. I can't blame him. And then you hear things about the press gangs, and you go, "Well, maybe there was a point somewhere." But you're right about the English Channel, because in Shakespeare's Richard II, the most amazing monologue I think Shakespeare ever wrote was John of Gaunt. It starts off, "This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this other Eden, demi-paradise," as he's describing Britain or England. But he's got a few lines that say, "This precious stone set in a silver sea, which serves it in the office of a wall, or as a moat defensive to a house against the envy of less happy lands." And that is the description of the English Channel. What else do you say? "This fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war." Like the amount of times England has been invaded is a lot, but compare it to any nation on the continent of Europe, it's nothing, because there's so many cases. Like even the Spanish Armada, right, okay, here it comes. It's like the nothing ever happens chud jack. You got, "Guys, it's happening. It's really happening. England's going to get invaded." No, nothing ever happens. Get destroyed in the English Channel or the North Sea. We are, and the Atlantic on the other end. We're literally in the middle of just the most evil bodies of water in the entire world, and it actually serves us quite well.
Yeah, it's amazing it's amazing how many times I'm reading like history of England, and it's like I get invaded, and there comes the British Channel to save the day again. It saved your country so many times. It's so cool.
It has, and it's what's really cool is like, so in the age of metal ships, the English Channel is not that big of a deal. Now it's like you rarely hear of naval disasters outside of like the Cape of Good Hope or the Horn of Africa and stuff like that. Nothing, it doesn't affect the English Channel at all. But the fact that it was basically impossible to get into England by boat. But if you're in England and build a boat, getting out is significantly easier. And that's just the geographic reason of why the Royal Navy becomes just an unbelievable, like, trying to fathom the strength of the Royal Navy at the peak of the empire it beggars belief compared to any other country on earth. And it's just simply that the English Channel it's an evil, vindictive bastard of water, and it's much easier to get out of it in a quick fashion than trying to land in it. And especially, you got to think, in a military invasion, you need to set a beachhead. The ships need to be moored offshore until pontoons are built onshore. And the longer you spend offshore, the more risk you've got of being destroyed. So yeah, getting out on a boat is so much easier than getting in. So England has this advantage in the age of sail of building the world's most powerful navy. But then when everyone starts using metal ships, okay, fine. Germany could have sent loads of metal ships over in the Second World War if it weren't for the fact that the Royal Navy was already the most powerful in the world because of this early advantage. It's pretty interesting to think about. Like even when the geography isn't as much of an obstacle, it just gave us such an early adopter's advantage.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you get into like World War, I think it's World War I or World War II. I can't remember what it was called, but the British Navy had to have like a certain number of ships more than every other navy or something. Like there was like a some metric they had to maintain their lead. I can't remember what they called it, but yeah, in World War II, Germany, when they started building ships, England had to immediately start building more ships because they had some policy about having to have at least 100 more ships or 50 more ships than the other guy or something. I can't remember what it was called though.
Right. Yeah, it's not ringing a bell.
Patrick Buchanan talked about it in his book.
Okay. I need to read what is it? The Unnecessary War.
Yeah, the Unnecessary. That's a great book, but it is very heartbreaking.
I'm sure it is.
Very brutal in the beginning when he talks about all the people that died and the loss of life and everything that happened in World War II. You're like, oh fuck, that's a lot of people.
Well, it's needed, this freaking stupid myth that we have about that period. It's needed for anything to change. So it's on my Kindle and I will read it.
Yeah, the World War II consensus has to die. It has to go.
Yeah, absolutely. But we're back at the 45 rebellion. There's not too much to say about it other than, yes, it was the closest England got to being restored as a Catholic country. So it's particularly, heartbreaking of a period. I think it's why I became so fascinated in the Jacobites. And in fact, I said so in a video I made like 3 years ago on how I first became a neo-reactionary. It was by learning about like these lost causes, essentially. Like that every man obsessed with history needs to have like a forgotten author and a lost and an impossible cause to take into your heart and like take on as your own. And for me, it was absolutely the Jacobites. I was looking at reaction, a lot of the anti-liberal revolutions which happened across Europe in various times and places, and the Jacobite rebellion is ours.
So two things. One, I looked it up. It was called the Two-Power Standard, a formal naval policy established in the Naval Defense Act of 1889. Required the Royal Navy be as strong as the next two largest navies combined. That's what
Whoa, damn.
Yeah, it's pretty
crazy.
Second, on you're 100% right on the lost cause. I think that's important for every man's soul to have a lost cause that makes them melancholic. But a man okay. Then for listeners, you as a man, you are never depressed. Depressed is feminine coded. You have melancholy. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
You're
Lindy.
a sensitive
That's
young
masculine.
man.
You are a sensitive young man. You are crying about Waterloo. You're not crying because your girl didn't text you. Okay. Keep that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. you've got to your heartthrobs need to be of a higher calling than measly worldly desires. You need to look back at photos of Rhodesia and get a lump in your throat. It's a rite of passage.
You just put one in my throat saying Rhodesia.
I know. It's easily done. That'll be interesting to talk about because I've been learning a lot more about that being a British colony. But
anyone listening, I had a guy on the podcast a few weeks back to do explaining me like I'm 5 the history of Rhodesia.
Oh, really?
Yes. Anyone wanting to learn about that, go listen to that. Yeah, it's a great episode. The guy breaks it down wonderfully. It's tragic and fascinating.
Yeah, and really, Britain and the United Nations are to blame. Not the rebels, not the communists. Yeah, dude, fucking awful.
I just gotta say this real quick about Rhodesia because it's one of my favorite. It's my favorite example of a military psyop. Is that a couple of Rhodesian soldiers were captured by the rebels, and they were the rebels told the captured Rhodesian told the rebels that when you sight your gun, the higher you put the number, the harder the gun shoots. And so they basically psyop the entire rebels into putting their sights all the way off and missing every shot.
And what's insane is like the Soviets always had like up to 1,000 yards available on their zeroing. And like when the caliber and the rifle had no chance of hitting out to the max zero that was available on these rifles. So like for a Kalashnikov platform in 7.62 to have 1,000-yard zero is mental. And like, if you were to put that zero on and line the sights up and try and aim at something 50 yards away, you're literally sending that bullet into orbit. So yeah, it's just they weren't sending their best.
No, I mean that's a great example. Funny thing with Rhodesia, there was for lack of a better term, a special forces team that did blackface to sneak into a rebel camp and massacre everybody.
Yeah, that was mostly the 𝕮𝖆𝖆 Scouts, from what I know. And I just got done listening to an audiobook of an autobiography of a 𝕮𝖆𝖆 Scout. What's pretty fascinating about the 𝕮𝖆𝖆 Scouts as well is I think 70% of them were black. And it's just not to be that the left are the real racist guy, but it's it does dismantle everything you're supposed to believe about the place.
Was it Ian Smith, the prime minister? That his name?
Yes.
Ian Smith was 100% right, and when he said to William F. Buckley, "We want an evolution of the native population, not a revolution from the native population." Yep. That's 100% reasonable and correct, and everyone was so fucking insane they called him a racist.
Yeah, and as well, he was also only ever defending the system of government that was the British Empire was. And he, what do you know? They were a British imperial colony trying to govern the place the way the British governed the place a few decades before. And because of that, Britain said, "You are disgusting. You are intolerable. You must be destroyed." Fucking crazy.
Tragic.
Yeah. Anyway, that's 200 years in the future. Because there's not. I don't think I should say much else about the Jacobite Rebellion. It failed. It was destroyed at the Battle of Culloden. They managed to this time break out of Scotland and get pretty far. I'm pretty sure they got as far as York before they had to turn back. And the funny thing about the French and Spanish betting on the Scots being the ones to overthrow the throne is they didn't think about just how much the Scottish Highlanders are homebodies. Like, you can just imagine, like, the Scottish Highlanders hate everyone else who isn't a Scottish Highlander. So if you take a Highlander out of the Highlands for a long period of time, they're going to start getting feisty. They're already a feisty people. They're going to say, "What am I doing here? York, I might as well be in Africa." And they got into England and just found that like the logistics of trying to get the Highlanders to fight outside of Scotland was completely impossible. Even though they knew the only way they could get what they wanted would be to take London. As soon as they got barely into England and went, "Oh, I don't like this place. I'm not going any further," which is just hilarious, I think.
That is pretty funny.
And they ended up getting chased all the way back by the Duke of Cumberland. He was he might have been one of the sons of George II or a cousin. He was an unbelievable military commander. They chased them all the way back to Culloden, which is in the Scottish Moors. I think it's just west of Edinburgh. And I've always said since discovering this, I would never actually be able to visit the battle site of Culloden. I think, like, talking about being a sensitive young man, it takes a lot for me to cry. And I'm not saying this because I'm so tough. It's just the way it is. But if I ever went to Culloden, I would have to be carried out on a stretcher. I would not emotionally be able to do it, because that's the end. That's it. That's the end of any reactionary movement in Britain. Gone, annihilated on this battlefield against the Duke of Cumberland. And it's a good one to look at the battle map of, because you could just see this, of course, at this time, there were firearms, but terrain was always still the deciding factor in battles. And you look at the terrain that the Duke of Cumberland had, and so the Jacobites and the Highlanders, because like I say, they're very feisty people. They were known for the Highland Charge, which is that's still a term that people will use when they talk about a charge, a Highland Charge. It's extremely similar to the rebel yell, of the American Southerners, and the Confederate charge, where they're just absolute lunatics screaming, running towards the front line with just swords against cannons, and just that sheer sight is enough to break the defenders' morale. And that was first established by the Highlanders. And the Culloden is a marsh, basically. It's a bog, and it was just, you look at it and you just go, this could only have ever possibly ended in disaster when the British army, because this is the British army now fighting against the Jacobites, were on dry land on the other side of the bog from the Highlanders, in a natural valley, and with cannons posted on the high ground on the valley, with a clear line of sight all across the bog, and line infantry at the choke point of the valley. And they did a Highland charge across boggy terrain in frickin' Scotland, with cannon bearing down on them. I want to say it's something like 50% of all the Highlanders were killed before they even reached the infantry line. And when they did, they're exhausted. They've just run across a bog. They've seen half of their forces die, and then they get into fights with their swords against bayonets. And you got to think, the bayonet on the end of a musket replaced the spear in the age of shot and pike, because the reach advantage is so great. The muskets are freaking huge; they're about as tall as a person, and then you stick a 3-foot spear tip on the top of it, and you're going to try and charge that with a sword. It's not going to end well.
I've seen the musket with the bayonets on them. There was a what's it called? In Florida, we have a place called 𝕮𝖆𝖆𝖆, where every year they do a pioneer reenactment for 2 weeks, where people will live out there and law up and camp and the stores and stuff, and they have a shooting range, but only for weapons of the time period.
Yeah.
And so you can go out there and see people dressed in the full pioneer clothes with the muskets with the bayonets on them, actually firing the muskets and the smoke going, and them and the ramrod down there to reload it. It's watching a guy shoot it, then drop it and pick up a second one and shoot it, and drop it and pull out a third one and shoot it, and then take like an hour to reload each of them is really cool. It's a great experience.
Have you ever watched Sharp?
I have not.
Oh, that's the thing for you to do next weekend or whatever you've got time free. It's again, we're jumping forward, but this is set in the Peninsular War initially. They're basically TV movies, and it's a series where Sean Bean is the main character. He plays the eponymous Sharp as one of the riflemen during the Napoleonic Wars, fighting in Spain against the French. And it's super low budget, which just gives it amazing charm. And it's despite that, it is without a doubt some of the most authentic portrayals of Napoleonic era soldiering and combat and costumes and everything. You've got to watch it. You would love it so much.
I'm sold because it has Sean Bean, and I'll watch literally anything that man is in.
He's so good.
He's so good. He was the only reason Game of Thrones was worth watching in the beginning.
Honestly, I'd agree. I've become so anti-Game of Thrones in the last few years. But anyway,
it's just that's a whole tangent we can't get into. But yeah,
I was going to say, I'm going to cut us off right there. But yeah, watch Sharp, man. And one of the famous quotes is what's the definition of a good soldier? I think is something like that. And the answer is always firing 3 rounds a minute in any weather. You got to think 3 rounds a minute. But yeah, that's a musket for you.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's the Battle of Culloden. The Jacobites lose. Bonnie Prince Charlie, aka Charles III, if you're a Jacobite, has to flee back to Rome. And I was freaking gutted when I went to Rome in January of this year. And they essentially, the 3 of them, I think it was, James III and his 2 sons, one of which became a cardinal. He was called the Cardinal Duke because after the other 2 heirs to the throne died, and the Jacobites would call, I think he was another James. He was either another James or another Charles. When he would have been, the king according to Jacobites, the Vatican said that the Vatican had supported the Stuarts this whole time during the Jacobite rebellion because they wanted the legitimate Catholic, monarchy back in England for obvious reasons. But after the Battle of Culloden, it was well understood that decades had been put into these uprisings to try and make them work. Ridiculous amounts of money. Half of the French naval fleet was destroyed before even getting into combat to try and sort this freaking thing out. And it was understood that it wasn't going to work anymore. So the Vatican said, look, sorry, we can't, to this cardinal who was the heir to the throne, we're going to call you the Duke. And I don't remember what dukedom they gave him. But they said, sorry, we can't support you as king anymore because it's just not going to happen. And it's so tragic. But all 3 of them lived in a townhouse in Rome that when we were looking at our itinerary and saying, okay, so we've got to go to St. Peter's this day, we've got to go to the Colosseum that day. I was like, can we please fit this townhouse in? But it was nowhere near anything else we were going to see. And tragically, I had to cut it. But even worse, these 3 Stuarts are all buried in St. Peter's Basilica. And I didn't realize. So we went to St. Peter's Basilica. We saw all the amazing things there, the Pieta and the relic of parts of the True Cross. And I missed the tomb of the Stuarts. It's James III, Bonnie Prince Charlie, and the Cardinal Duke. Yeah, they're all buried there. So the amazing connection for me, being a British neo-reactionary and a Catholic.
It's all right there.
It's literally all right there. So we got to go back to Rome. I got to see the townhouse. I got to see more of what Mussolini built as well. We could have made more of that.
Yeah, I gotta get to Rome. I gotta get to Europe first, man. I gotta.
Yeah,
my parents is doing a pilgrimage to Rome.
Good.
They're starting in Rome, and then they're gonna walk from Rome the same path St. Paul walked, and they're gonna end up in Greece.
Oh, awesome!
Which sounds so cool, but I'm like, they're all 80 years old. I don't know how the hell they're gonna walk it. Like I've seen them walk; they suffer. So we'll see. But,
they got to have that dog in them.
There's something about old people when they travel; they just immediately get revitalized.
Yeah. I've seen it with my own family members.
Yeah.
But all right. So period of history. We're next on them. We are jumping to King George III. Who obviously means a heck of a lot to Americans. And
I bet you 90% of Americans though couldn't tell you what king was the king of England during the Revolutionary War, because it's actually
really, you think so?
Most history books don't actually mention the king.
Who do they think they were fighting against?
They just say the British, and then they make vague allusions to taxation was that representation. They never really go into the leaders of the other side. They focus
talk about on tyranny and not the tyrant.
Yes, which is, I don't know. I always found it odd. Like most things, like I'll be honest, unless when it comes to like popular level stuff about the Revolutionary War, most things avoid mentioning of him. The only thing I can think of that name him are the Alexander Hamilton musical and the John Adams HBO TV show.
Oh, right.
That's it. Most other things just ignore him, which I find it's odd, to avoid to ignore the enemy, the monarch of the people you're fighting.
What is very interesting as well is I've heard this as an anecdote. I've not actually checked this entirely true, but it's something you'll hear proponents of monarchy say, that the American revolutionaries knew that petitioning to Parliament was absolutely pointless because they were these, cockroach bureaucrats with no patrimonial lineage, no care for their people. So they would just completely bypass Parliament and try to appeal to King George III, which it's that, that happened for a while until George III realized I am powerless against Parliament, and also I probably don't care about your cause. To then the revolutionists had to flip it on their head and say George is the tyrant, it's the monarch. We need to be a republic. But I take the same view you do, that like all of these justifications are post hoc. Things have already been set in motion. There are incentives in place, which mean the American Revolution is inevitably going to happen. And then they think of reasons of why it's happening.
So before we get really deep into it, let me ask you this as a kind of clarifying question to begin with. I can't remember who wrote it, but there's a book called The True History of the Revolutionary War, written by a British historian who was living in America. Curtis Yarvin talks about this book, and the summary of the book is the guy's argument is that basically, to put it in modern terms, the Revolutionary War was England's Vietnam, which is that it wasn't very popular, it wasn't a popular war. But the citizens, and so they never really put too much effort into it. They never really sent a bunch of troops over, and when they started losing, the popular support was lost, and so they had to abandon it. Does that seem accurate to your understanding of the events?
See, I think so, but I don't know much about the social history of this period back in England. I don't know what the English people were making of it so much. But I think what ties into that is, well, first of all, Britain's Vietnam was the Malaya crisis, Malaya emergency. This was in the 1950s when communists in Malaysia were trying to fight the British Empire, and it was literally like war in the jungle, guerrilla warfare against communism. 20 years.
I'm looking at the photos now, and it looks very Vietnam.
You can find some mental photos of a Royal Marine holding like the decapitated heads of like 3 communist rebels. It was crazy.
I'm looking at it now. Holy shit, that is
it was mad.
And he's smiling. What the fuck?
He's loving it. He's wearing his green beret and everything. It's like it's been set up.
I'm always so torn when I see pictures of soldiers smiling when they're doing.
I know.
Because on one hand, I can imagine if I was there with my boys and we just got out of a firefight and I'm holding people's heads, I can imagine all the emotions and the endorphins of being alive at the end. You can't help but smile. But then you're not in the situation you're removed looking at a photo when it looks so monstrous.
Yeah.
Just be a smiling guy holding heads.
But it is just the embodiment of like the ugly truth of like, the politicians in their comfy rooms behind their nice, varnished desks, sign a little piece of paper and say, that's it, we're going to war. And the actual implications are not thought about. And when you see those implications, you go, oh, maybe that was a bad idea. So yeah, if only everyone in all of human history had always been saying, actually, war is kind of bad, guys. If you'd stop to think about that, maybe you wouldn't have to see these photos and have that on your conscience.
I'm looking at the casualties right now. Total killed 11,000. Civilians killed 2,478. Civilians missing 810. Wow.
And the vast majority of those civilians killed were by the communists.
I'm sure. Communists.
That they were deliberately running a terror campaign because, like, the local populace just thought we don't want to get involved. The British were again terribly treating the Malaysians. They were basically moving them into like reservations, displacing them and putting them in like camps. Like they were horrible. But they weren't just going around and just like saying, right, well, this village doesn't support the communist rebels, so we're just going to kill them all.
Yeah,
that was their modus operandi. But I need to stop jumping centuries ahead because that's Britain's Vietnam. It was the Malaya emergency. Barely anyone knows about it, but it's super interesting. The American Revolution, from the British perspective, there's all the political justifications as well. I think there are things as well that you wouldn't hear from the American revolutionaries, that they say no taxation without representation. So the British Parliament said, okay, fine, you can have representation. And then they thought, hang on, representation means we need someone in the Houses of Parliament because, this is before Microsoft Teams. You can't just, when Parliament's in session, you can't just call in. They need to have a representative in Parliament, at least one, if not like one for every state. But so then the revolutionaries said, no, that's not going to work. So, you know, so then it's just a stalemate. It's like, what? You guys asked for representation. We've offered it and you've said no. Like, there are things like that, you know, when you take an illiberal view of history, that you look back on the American Revolution, and yeah, you do apply this. You know, this is the dawn of ideology, and ideology just comes with so much propaganda and lies that no matter if you're pro-American or pro-British, which, you know, this conflict was 300 years ago, it actually doesn't matter. You know, the Jacobite rebellion matters in a sense to the modern world, where you think, oh, what could have been? The world would be so different. But the American Revolutionary War in the modern day has absolutely no relevance. So it's not, you know, if you, it has to be looked at value free, which it never is. Yeah. It just simply never is, because it is part of the founding myth of the liberal global empire.
I've tried to find like value free. I've tried to find any kind of value free stuff on George Washington, but every book I find paints him in such a, they look at him from today and they judge him by today's liberal standards as like the father of American liberalism. Like, first of all, we know he wasn't so perfect. He sailed across the Delaware on Christmas Day to massacre people.
Yes,
he had a little bit of like Hannibal energy in him when it came to leading. He wasn't. So what's that angle? It is not one book that dissects that angle of Washington as military leader. Which is,
I imagine the closest you could ever find would be one that touches on the Whiskey Rebellion. And again, that's one that most people don't know about, that the Americans win the revolution and start taxing people at high rates. And the people say, wait, hang on, we just kicked out the British for this. We're not having that. And they start rebelling, and Washington absolutely crushes it. It's just like, and you know, I don't want to sit here and go, oh, he's such an evil, mean person for doing that, because while I think that is true, it doesn't add anything to imply, you know, to force your own morals on a historical analysis like that. But that's what everyone does for the revolution. So he was the perfect man. He did nothing wrong. Yeah, he did within a few years.
That's actually why I think historians are the worst at writing history, because they are the most in my opinion, from reading history books, historians seem to be the most unaware of their own political biases that influence the way they view history. I'd much rather read history from like an economist or from a political theorist or a philosopher who understands their own political biases than a historian who ignores them and believes he's objective.
Yeah, and you know, like my favorites, Rothbard and Hopper, written so much about history, but you know, when you read them talking about history, you're going to get just a fistful of bias. And that's exactly why I always say, whenever I talk about anything, that I've been making, like, you know, more value-free videos lately on my channel about an analysis of sci-fi and stuff like that. And a lot of people have gotten really pissed off when they're not political and they click on this video and I start to get political. And I understand it. I understand why they feel deceived. But at the same time, I'm like, no, I have biases. You have biases. Like, if you are 99% of the Western population, you're a liberal. You have a stake in an ideological narrative and propaganda and biases, but you think that's the default. Anyway,
that's the whole tangent we can get into about liberals don't have an ideology. They just have the present. That's all they have.
The current thing.
The current year. That's all it is. Like, that was one of AA's greatest points, honestly. I'm not a huge fan of AA, but that video he did on how they only have it's the current year, the current thing, was an incredible video. Yeah,
and it's what I think it's similar to what 𝕉𝖆𝖉𝖆 talks about a lot, which is the view of the past as a foreign country, of just like anything that isn't the current year is some sort of backwards civilization that has no bearing on the present, which is, of course, then, you know, as we know, hypocrisy, because Martin Luther King is the replacement for Jesus in the public theocracy. So the past does matter when they care about it. It doesn't matter when you care about it. Anyway, oh man, I'm terrible. I've got no discipline when it comes to these sorts of keeping on track.
Well, this is why the 3 hours long and interesting is its history and the tangents.
Yeah. It's just whenever I get on anything, whenever I show up anywhere and make a video about anything, you need to know what you're signing up for in that regard. So what we need to talk about is what we briefly did before we started going live, was King George III as a person, because like you say, he doesn't figure into the actual creation myth of America, which is bonkers because he was central in the propaganda that the revolutionaries were putting out at the time. And he was a basket case, and a lot of modern historians will they would cry if they heard me say that, because mental health, all of that narrative. He was severely mentally ill, but he went through bouts of it, and I think a lot of people say it would be bipolar, because he would have years at a time where he was completely fit, completely normal. He was even putting his foot down on Parliament a little bit.
Yeah, that's one thing. That's one of the things Andrew Robert talks about, is that when he was in his right mind, he was doing a pretty good job.
He was a fantastically like Machiavellian almost in his relationship to Parliament, as like a lion against the foxes.
He'd have those months, years, or windows when he'd snap, and it would just be awful because he was bipolar.
Pretty much, and I think that there's lots of different symptoms that he would show with like some sort of illness, where one of which is he would uncontrollably talk for hours, like just babbling until he started he was just basically coughing up blood because he was straining his voice that much. He was just lunatic. But what's so crazy is that it's on and off, because so during these periods he would basically be exiled by his family to what's now called Kew Palace, Kew. But what's really funny is at the time it was called the White House, which I think is hilarious, given he was the king during the revolution.
That is really funny.
And when he was basically banished to his own mansion, I think it's like the southwest suburbs of London, they would do like the most insane medicinal experiments on him. Sometimes it was basically just beating the crap out of him to try and knock some sense into him. Other times it was I think they still do it in like Chinese aromatherapy and stuff like that, cupping, where you get like you heat up a small glass cup and you place it on someone's back, and as the heat disperses, it creates a vacuum in the cup, and it like sucks your skin up into the cup. And it's supposed to, biology was of course wacky at this time, and I think they might have still been running on the humors theory of human biology. And they were thinking if we rise his blood is running too hot. So if we rise his blood to the surface on his skin, it will cool down quicker, and that will cool down his brain and stop him from being a lunatic. But what I think, honestly, I think this is just funny. This thing is tragic for him, but it's absolutely hilarious that because he was on and off on his mania, they would do these insane things and basically tie him to a chair and just beat the snot out of him. And then the next day he'd be normal again, and they go, "Oh, it worked." Which, there's something so morbidly funny. I'm a terrible person for finding it as funny as I do.
No, I mean,
but I do think
there are some things in history that are morbid but are so funny. Like here's a great example. My favorite morbid comedic thing in history. Okay, when so many of the slaves in America believed the slave masters were cannibals and were going to eat them.
Yeah,
because so many of in Africa, the first time they met white people, it was priests and Jesuits, and they would only thing they remember about them is they eat their own god. Therefore, they're absolutely going to eat me.
I didn't know that. I know that today you can still find the nutcases on Twitter who say that white people always ate black people, but I didn't know that was the reason.
That's what it came about. Is the only thing they knew about Europeans was they ate their own god, so they would absolutely eat me.
And their god was a man.
Which is. It's morbid. But it's also that's just objectively that's fucking hilarious.
Yeah,
it's tragic. It's morbid, but it's so funny.
That must be part of like a Catholic sense of humor, right? With everything we think about the Eucharist, to hear that and go, you know what? That's just funny.
It is. I mean, it goes back to what was when Jesus, even when our Lord first said it, he had people depart from him. When Paul said it, people started crazy. Objectively. Early Roman times, everyone thought, Christians are cannibals. That's something weird that they do that's different. They're cannibals. And to see that was still a problem with slaves is so funny.
But you know what's most insane about that is that's what reformers would say about the doctrine of the Eucharist, they would say, "Well, Jesus wouldn't tell you to be a cannibal." So, did you need to go back and listen to the him saying to the 5,000? They've turned up because they want their feast of fish the next day, and he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you." Did you forget that bit? Anyway,
I mean, as much as I have my issue with Luso, there's so many instances of like Catholic apologetics to Protestants when we do need to adopt the Luso's is means is. You know, when it's like, no, our Lord is not a liar. Is means is.
Yeah, wasn't he like he would like bang on the table and just point to the verses written down?
I think by the third day they said he wouldn't even talk. He would just point and just point to it, which is so funny.
Honestly, what do they say? Oh, the plain things are the true things. The true things are the plain things. It couldn't be plainer. It couldn't be plainer. Where were we? Okay, so King George is mental, and I don't know if he's lucid or if he's mental during the American Revolution, but it's not like that would really change anything. Because another thing to sort of dismantle the revolutionary myth is that basically the entire South in America was loyalist in the American Revolution. That's completely forgotten about. The reason that, like, I think, well, something like the Battle of Bunker Hill is it's a pivot point in the war. It's massively important, but the reason why you only hear about Paul Revere and Bunker Hill and everything that went on in Massachusetts is because everything in the Carolinas was American versus American, and that immediately just undermines the whole myth. And I take this back to looking at the importance of the English Civil War on American history, because this is playing out the same way. The people of the South were the royalists in the English Civil War. The people in the North were the parliamentarians. And that same conflict played out in the American Revolution and the American Civil War.
Many of the landowners of the South during this time were descendants of or related to or still technically part of some dukes or nobles. Like they was, I mean, southern, what do they call it nowadays? Southern culture of being nice to everybody. Is this a evolved or
chivalry?
Evolved chivalry? Exactly. Yes,
it literally is.
So much of this. I mean, this is why I love Robert E. Lee. Is he basically was the last American knight, pretty much.
Yeah, literally. And there's so many things about people like Robert E. Lee, or so much about the South, where you can say this a lot about Rhodesia as well. More British than the British. Like the Southern America at the time of the Revolution was basically like a distilled essence of Britishness in so many ways. And again, the same with Rhodesia, because like I said, they had a British political system and Britain killed them for it. So they're more British than the British. And yes, that was much the same with the American South.
Yeah.
So it's another fascinating, America was culturally distinct from England at this time. Of course, this was over 100 years of settlement, but it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as everyone, all Americans were just Thomas Jefferson and George Washington times a few million. No, what do you know? All conflicts are so much more complicated than that. I've already had to talk about the myths of just the Jacobite Rebellion. Who's ever heard of the Jacobite Rebellion? Not many people, but it's still so full of myth that need to be just completely gone rid of, because it just obscures history so badly. And that's the American Revolution too.
I do want to say this about the American Revolution that gets left out, is the importance of the French-Indian War and the amount of money spent in it. That was the cause for the increase in taxation too, because that's kind of completely ignored.
And the 7 Years War.
Yes,
which was
objectively, America, we did owe money. Basically, we did owe money. We can argue about the collection rates, see how it was collected, all those kind of things. The troops coming into redcoats coming to random Americans' home saying, "We live here now. Give me your food and do my laundry." We could talk a lot about all those things, but I think objectively,
which are unjust.
Yes, you can make a very strong argument, and I think is true, that America did kind of skip the bill when it came to the
honestly.
War and the French and Indian War.
So I don't know anything about the French-Indian War, but what I do understand is that the 7 Years' War was Britain versus France in their colonies, which of course were mostly in the Americas. And I'm sure so many of those soldiers just were American within the British Army and the Royal Navy.
I believe Washington fought in Could be wrong.
He did.
Yeah, I think.
Well, he was definitely a British military officer, wasn't he? I don't know if he served. Let me look this up because like how important is that, man?
Yeah.
Yeah, he played a significant war in the 70s War, also known as the French and Indian War. So they're the same conflict.
The same thing.
Yeah.
I will say on the French Indian War, the 7 Years' War, I do have to point out that one of my favorite details of it is when the British teamed up with the Indians. They immediately, after one battle, they wrote a letter to the French like, "Hey, you need to surrender because these Indians are crazy and they will scalp you and eat you. You need to surrender right now. Please just surrender. We did not mean to get these boys wired up. Everyone needs to calm down and surrender." And French didn't, and then the Indians scalped and ate a bunch of people because that's what they did.
Yep. Not surprised. I was just reading.
Like,
sorry.
Even the English were upset. Like, man, fuck, we didn't want them to do that.
Yeah, that's too far, guys. We hate the French, but come on.
Come on.
Yeah, I was just reading. I think it was a couple of days ago about. So it's famous now that the Vikings settled in America before the Spanish and the Italians, Columbus and all of that. But I've never thought, well, why didn't those colonies last? And supposedly, an oral tradition of the Vikings who went back to Iceland and Scandinavia was literally that the natives were so insane that they were just too much to deal with, and they said, right, you guys are too much hassle, you are too crazy. I think there was a story that a native touched a Viking's axe, and the Viking took that to think he's going to steal it, so he cut his head off. But that just meant that after that point there were just constant raids of the natives, just going in, burning, killing, scalping and eating people. The Vikings said, we're insane. Like, the Vikings have the reputation of being the insane butchers. And they encounter the Native Americans and were, wow, that's a bit much. I'm out. Peace.
Yeah, I would never stop defending colonization because no one wants to recognize the Indians were terrible, terrible, evil people for the longest time, and they had to be civilized forcibly. It's just the way history is.
I think that myth is currently under scrutiny, and not on no short part from resistance from the dissident right and people who will say, no, America did not exist before the Europeans built it. It was just a piece of land. It wasn't America.
That is one thing that's interesting, is that so many comedians have been getting into history, and they have so many podcasts now that talk about history. Is that it's weird that comedians are kind of the leading example of a counter narrative historical take. Is like St. Gareth breaking down history of the French Indian War, which is weird, but it's if you buy into the theory that comedians are just the evolved version of jesters for the modern age, it kind of makes sense. I never really bought into that. I don't know.
I think I do.
I don't understand. How do I put this? I don't fully understand what the hell a jester's role was to say is or is not the case. No,
that's fair.
What exactly? Maybe you can answer that question. What exactly was a jester's job? Like, what were they doing?
I don't
know.
Well, I could probably relate it to something I learned about recently called an ornamental hermit. So something to understand is like you like Warhammer 40k, right? Have I made that up?
I know a little bit about it, but I've never played it.
Okay. Sure. Well, in the lore, there's an alien species called the 𝕮𝖆𝖆. They've been around for millions of years. They were immortal for the longest time. And all that meant was they just descended into insane debauchery. And they would just constantly torture, eat and rape each other. Because just after millions of years of no predators and immortal life, they just went mental. There is kind of a lot of that in the history of the European aristocracy. Not to that extent, but they ended up doing a lot of weird things. One of them is a jester. And I don't know much about jesters, but what I did learn about recently were ornamental hermits, where you've got a stately home, like, your Downton Abbey, with lots of land on it. The nobles they're very eccentric. All European aristocrats are still massively eccentric, and I love it. I think they're hilarious for it. So they would employ a man to be an ornamental hermit on their land, and they would build like a hermitage, like a shed, for this guy to live in. and they would say, right, so we're going to give you, a few shillings a week, and you're not allowed to talk to anyone. If you ever do, you just have to make like weird noises and grunts. You're only allowed to wear like animal furs. You're not allowed to shave. You need to look absolutely insane so that when our other aristocratic friends come over for dinner, they can look at you and just go, wow, isn't that funny? It's just this sort of just like insane stuff that aristocrats get their kicks from. And I love it. And I just think it just as an extension of that, it just like absolute insane sense of humor.
Okay.
There's a friend of mine recently went to 𝕮𝖆𝖆𝖆, which is a huge, former aristocratic estate. It's where most of Pride and Prejudice is filmed with Keira Knightley.
It's a great movie.
Yeah,
great
it is.
Movie. That's the best version of the story, in my opinion.
Yeah, it definitely is. But do you remember the scenes when it's raining and they're at like that? It's called the Temple of Apollo. It's the old, classical, tiny little structure on the side of the hill with the trees behind it. That bit's at 𝕮𝖆𝖆𝖆, and they had, I think, on that estate there's like 4 ornamental hermitages, where like it became like an arms race to have as many of these ornamental hermits as you can. Oh, I just love it. Love stuff like that. Where were we?
I think
this is actually the most disorganized ever. I told you I'm just not that interested in this history apart from the Jacobite Rebellion. So I just.
Well, let's get into this. I think we were talking about the 7 Years' War, and we were talking about the causes, catalysts, and the effects of the King George III and the Revolutionary War. That's a war.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I don't think there's much else to say because he went bonkers and then he went lucid. I think he was around though to see the rise of Napoleon, which is pretty crazy. He was very, very advanced in his years at the time of Napoleon rising through the ranks of France, which was probably the mid 1790s. Yeah. So you really do quickly move from the American Revolution to the Napoleonic era. And it's an utterly terrifying time for the British state. And, I absolutely think that Britain was wrong for aggressing against Napoleon, but it's completely understandable why.
It's the European freak out to the French Revolution makes complete sense.
It's totally understandable. And especially as well, even more for Britain, which has just lost, half of its New World colonies to a revolution. And then there's one on their doorstep with the reign of terror and the death of so many of the ruling class. You can absolutely, as anti-war as I am, you can't look at that and say there was no reason for Britain to go absolutely schizophrenic over the rise of Napoleon, because that Jacobinism simply just had to be crushed, or else Britain would just completely collapse and go the same way France did. So
yeah, and the only reason the French, how do I put this? I think we'll end it here for now because we're almost at the 2-hour mark.
Okay.
But when it comes to the French Revolution, I'm always torn on it because objectively, it is maybe one of the most evil events in European history. I mean, I get a little teary-eyed when I think about Marie Antoinette walking to the guillotine. It's
yeah.
Did you know? I've got to say this. She begged for them to send her a priest so he can give confession before being beheaded, and because they were, the cult of reason, secularist faggots, they wouldn't send her a priest. But a bishop snuck back into the city and hid on the second story of a decrepit house. And while he was walking to the guillotine, he made the sign of the cross to her from the window, absolving her of her sins, and she died smiling, which is just
fantastic.
Oh, yeah. But the French Revolution, it's objectively is just evil. But the chaos of the French Revolution gave rise to my favorite great man of history, Napoleon.
Yeah.
So, it sucks, but it gave us Napoleon. And I think
I'd rather do without Napoleon and the revolution, to be honest, if I could choose.
I should say yes, but I'm not. I said like, oh yeah, it's not worth it. All the deaths and mayhem and violence is not worth it. But
and also all the death and mayhem and violence that Napoleon caused himself.
Well, Napoleon was cool. Napoleon was the first person ever to fire cannons in a civilian population. He fired
Yeah, good on
into
him.
a crowd. He fired chainsaw into a crowd.
That was in Paris, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, that's
And
crazy.
when asked about it, he said his brother asked him about it, and he said in a letter to his brother, "The mob thinks himself invincible. Kill a few of them, and they all go home." He's not wrong.
And he's not wrong.
So we'll call it here, and when we come back next time, we'll open up with Napoleon, England. Oh my God, what was the name of the sailor? The British sailor during the Napoleonic era. What was that guy's name?
Oh, come on, Nelson.
Oh,
Admiral Nelson.
Yes, that guy's a badass. That guy's really cool.
He's seriously one of like England's top heroes of all of history. What an absolute unit!
Incredible. You guys have some great naval heroes.
Yeah, big time. And most of them are completely forgotten, apart from local areas like Cornwall. I've talked about Cornwall before, but like it's got such a rich naval history, and there's a reason why like all the pirate accents you hear in movies are Cornish accents. And Admiral 𝕮𝖆𝖉𝖆 is a man who's still massively revered, but only in Cornwall because he was an amazing Cornish sailor who lost like I think he lost both of his legs in action and continued to fight. Yeah, stuff like that.
So badass. America, we only have one really cool naval hero, and it's John Paul Jones.
Yeah, and he was just a nutcase, wasn't he?
He was a nutcase, but he was a badass nutcase. So he's cool.
Yeah. It's the kind of person that they're mental. We'll point them in the right direction, and they're going to cause absolute mayhem.
Yeah, also we got a kick-ass song about him from Johnny Horton. Which is everyone listening, go listen to John Paul Jones from Johnny Horton. It's a great country song. I'll
do the same.
But I think we'll stop it there. 𝕮𝖆𝖆, any plugs, any final thoughts, anything you want to say before we close it out?
Well, I just find it crazy that we said, oh yeah, we can finish it in this episode, and we've taken 2 hours and only covered 1 century. I don't think we've been more time inefficient than this.
I think this is the longest episode with the least amount of covered, I think.
And it's also what I think is like the most boring century. Yeah. So that's insane.
Well, I will say it's a boring century from England's perspective because there's way more exciting stuff. Everything exciting happening in the century is not in England but related to England. It's the American Revolution, it's the French Revolution, it's all the other things.
And as well, like I say, this is the real rise of the empire, which means that everything going on in England is related to stuff with the empire, which means as someone who cares about the history of England itself, the place and the people, it just gets more and more distant from then on. But anyway, plug-wise, I've become more consistent with making videos, which is not to say I've become consistent, just more so. I'm currently analysing Dune, the philosophy and politics of it. I've got a few more videos to come out about that, so do subscribe on YouTube. They're performing super well. Very glad about it. I'm going to carry on. There's also Twitter and Substack. What am I on Twitter? 𝕮𝖆𝖆𝖉𝖆. Substack, Letters from Mercia. That's all I've got.
The links are in the description. If anyone wants to go follow him, which you absolutely should. And I'll stick around when we finish this, because I gotta talk about Dune a little bit with you.
Oh, come on, let's do it.
We gotta talk a little bit of Dune. But everyone, that's the episode. Next episode, hopefully cover the fun stuff. We'll cover Napoleon and we'll cover Nelson, and we'll hopefully get more into the next episode. Anyway, everyone, thanks for listening. Have a good night and God bless.